Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. It is our first episode. It's hard to believe it's already September, but it do. It's our first episode of September. Top of the show stuff, getting close, but we have Freyr's Harvest Feast coming up this month in just a couple of weeks. That's going to be the 20th through the 22nd. It's in Montana. If anybody can make it, I would love to meet you there. Be my first time attending the event and my first time visiting a lot of the folks up there, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I hope to see everybody who can make it. If you're interested, please reach out to a folk builder. They get you all set up. And a couple of other things while we've got you. In October, we got Winter Nights coming up for the very first time in New Hampshire. That should be beautiful. I'm very excited about it. Coming up October 11th through the 13th. Again, if you are interested, reach out to your local folk builder. They get you all set up. It should be beautiful that time of year. And then in November, we have Feast of the Einherjar in South Dakota. It's going to be November 8th through the 10th. So a lot of stuff coming up in the next few months. A lot of opportunity for you guys to make it out to an event. We would love to see you guys at any or all of these. So if you're interested, any of our folk builders can get you all set up. And yeah, it's going to be exciting. Got a lot of powerful ritual work to do and great fellowship time with the folks. So I look forward to that. Couple few news and notes items. We have, all right, so we've been trying to raise money for the payoff of Njordshof now for quite some time. It's a drum I continue to beat, and I know you guys are tired of hearing about it, but we're doing very, very well on it. Because it was in Florida and is a very nice piece of property. It was a little bit more expensive than our other hofs, but we've made amazing progress in just 2 years and 1 month since we got it. We have paid off 0.6%, which is huge. You guys have been extremely generous. I appreciate it. And just throwing it out there, we have $79,161 remaining. If every AFA member donated $104, we would have it paid off immediately. Progress has been tremendous. Anytime you got a sum this big, progress is slower than you'd like, but it's been great, and we really appreciate y'all's generosity. So thank you very much, everybody who has donated. If you are interested, if you are able, we always appreciate your donations and would love to have your help getting us closer. Our next goal of projects that we're working on, once we pay off Njordshof, is going to be trying to locate a property and get set up for making Freyshof happen. So in order to do that, we got to first pay our obligations on Njordshof, and then we can move forward with that project. Already been looking. There's some very, very tempting properties in both in Western Pennsylvania and in Eastern Ohio that are really nice. So I have no doubt we'll find something beautiful and amazing when the time comes. But yeah, thank you everybody who's donated to that. Other top of the show things don't really have don't have anything huge for you this week. Tonight we're going to be going into I think a often overlooked poem in the Eddas, and something that I think you know, would be cooler if it wasn't as fragmentary as it is, but is really special nonetheless, and has some really powerful imagery in it, and I think is just kind of a neat thing for us to go over. And I think it's apropos that we have Svan here, the son of Iceland, gonna go into the story with the Swan Maidens in it. So, Svan, what do you got to prep folks? What do we need to know before we go into the Völundarkviða tonight?
A couple things. One, this is one that a lot of people don't know about, and it's more of akin to Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. It has a lot of historical connections. It has a lot of migration period connections. Most likely this poem migrated northward, and that's another point that we had hit on earlier in VNS was the battle bout between Lord Odin and Lord Thor may very well have been an influence coming from the Slavic nations, specifically pointing at the story of Perun and Veles having a battle of words. This too is another example of a northward moving tale. So most likely picked up by the Anglo-Saxons from the Isles, but it has a lot of mentions about the Rhine. So the origin of this story is probably somewhere between 500 and 800 of the Common Era. And this is like it has all of the elements. If there is one story that really is just saturated with Aryan mythos, this is it. I wouldn't, well, not the only one, but this is the one that is very hard to top. It has ascendancy. It has, again, the marking of a mortal's life by the gods with a sense of, again, attaining heaven. It is just, it's worth noting that in certain stories, though, there is a vast difference between victims. Some of the victims in the Old Norse story, and I think by the time the Old Norse really had written it down, the ascendancy and the idea of humans reaching kind of demi-godhood, if you will, was not entertained too much by society. But I think it was earlier. So you see a lot of questionable things going on, sometimes in the name of revenge, but in other stories, the victim of revenge is actually not even a victim, but is wedded, is a bride. So you see that a lot in these stories. Perfect example as well is in Saxo Grammaticus's version. Lord Odin, he forcefully throws himself upon the princess of the Ukrainians at the time. I'm forgetting their names in the story. They're not called Ukrainians, but it is of the people of that area. And he places this pretty violently, whereas in the Norse, it is clearly a union that's, permissible. And so you'll see this a lot happen where stories will kind of twist the relations between elements and characters in the story for effect. And this is this one is very much one that's very, very aggressive, if you will. Uh, but we have to bear in mind that these stories have migrated across areas and they do have a tendency to change. Most people might be familiar with Völundar, with Wayland of the Anglo-Saxons. And there's no doubt that he was honored amongst the Central European, Germanic, or Teutonic Aryans. And there is elements within this story that hearken even to a farther past. The construction of wings, much like Daedalus and Icarus, in the Greek stories of the inventor, if you will, trapped by the Minoans. So
Or in the Kansas song.
Say again?
I said, or in the Kansas song.
The Kansas song. Oh no, you gotta bring me in the loop.
No, you'll get it. The audience will get it.
Nope. Okay.
But what I want to say real quick, just so everybody can follow along, we're going to be going through, as always, the Bellows translation, and Nick can put up the link. But look at any one that you would like, any translation you'd like. There's value to each. But Voluspow.org is where we're going for our particular translation. That way you can kind of follow along at home. Yeah, that was, apologize for the interruption. I just want to make sure they're finding it. So when we jump in, they're ready.
It kind of gives me a chance to, because my mind goes 5,000 times faster than my words. So it gives me a second to kind of reiterate what I'm trying to get across to everyone is that amongst the Anglo-Saxon people of old, Wayland oftentimes would be given offerings as a member of the gods, if you will. Perhaps they would list him as an Aus, but we don't know. It's not confirmed. We also don't know if the Old Norse gave offering to him as well, and what station he held. But clearly, he is considered elevated, a mortal that is upon the earth and then ascends up to the gods. And it's kind of hard for people to differentiate when an author is trying to euhemerize or humanize a divine being for various reasons, whether it's Christianity or for the sake of drama and the story. As they do say, like in the history of the Yinglings, Lord Odin and Lord North are euhemerized as people. And I've spoken on that about how I think that those are representations of their cult, of their following of folk. But in this case, Völundar, or Wayland as the Anglo-Saxons called him, is a mortal who is taken note of his deeds of vengeance, his deeds of retribution. And all of these things mark him as being elevated. And this speaks to it's a great topic that very few people bring up. Well, when we look at Saxnot, when we look at Nehelania, when we look at Völundar or Wayland, when we look at shield sheathing, the idea that there is a possibility that they could be ascendant, or Skirnir, of Skirnismal. And I don't mean this in any sort of disrespect. But again, these beings are often very niche in their worship. And and are held sometimes strictly to only tribes. And I'm not making a decree in that sense, but it leads to a great amount of evidence that they could very well be ascendant heroes, ascendant demigods, if you will. I guess that would be the only word I could think of, where prayers, are then brought to them, but that it's done not from an ancestor sense, but from a one who has been brought in. The mantle has been placed on to be the forge master or the smith of the gods. And it's such a gray area, because you have Völundar, but then some people would say, well, like, why isn't Beowulf such an ascendant? And I'm not saying that he isn't. I definitely don't think that it would be wrong to give gifts to Beowulf. But that's the thing about this story. It's really grounded in political machinations that are happening in Sweden, which, again, this story doesn't come from Sweden. So it's the story of a king somewhere in our history. And it has a lot of intrigue. It has a lot of vengeance. It has a lot of murder. It is a extremely graphic and aggressive story for being as short as it is. And it is, well, you had mentioned fragmentary, because one of the sections that this poem was written on a break in the paperwork, or in the papers, and a lot of it was lost. However, there is connections to the Anglo-Saxon poem called Deor, Deor. There's mentionings of Völundar in there. And then there's also the Friedrich saga. And that is another like lending to. So this not only has multiple connections and connection points to other mediums. And it's one of the few times in which Old Norse and Anglo-Saxon are quite clearly connected. I think a lot of folks, or a lot of the scholarly types, especially of the old, would try to say that Lord Odin and Lord Wodan of the Anglo-Saxons were different gods. And on top of the names of the days of our weeks being pretty spread about, or later changed by Christianity. This is another example that really connects us all. Northern.
Some people are silly geese. So
yeah.
I want to throw a couple of things out there. First, GW Farnsworth bought us 5 coffees. It's a $25 donation. We appreciate you. Thank you very much. He is a consistent donor to the program. One thing that on the side, and in a number of different AFA chats, folks have questions and curiosities about the unity of Aryan religiosity. And I think that a lot of people don't try to logic it out. Because I've read historical works and historians and archaeologists and whatever, and they examine each group of gods, even though the names are clearly the same, or phonetically exactly the same, but in the regional tongue, as if they're different pantheons of gods. And it lends itself to their area of study in a really specific scholastic way. If the gods are big comic book characters in an ancient people's, ooga booga conception of the world. But we know that that's not true. So we know that these gods are real, and they're real personalities. And we also know that as the creative forces that shaped our race and our people and our souls, they've been with us as long as we've been a folk. So, logic bears out, where did these gods come from? Because they appear in Anglo-Saxon England. Well, how did they get there? Where were they before that? What did the people that populated England worship before they went to England? Oh, they worship these same gods, but with linguistic differences in, Denmark and Frisia and the continent. Okay, where'd those people come from? Oh, well, they were slightly different when they were further east. Okay. And if you trace it back, logically, these beings don't just spring out of nowhere, and they've been with our people since the beginning. And I want to say that to kind of impart something to consider with this, especially when we get into poems with sketchy historical references. You have oral tales of times that have been with our people since, the good old days. And the good old days means something different depending on what people you talk to. It amazes me. It amazes me looking back now at stuff. It's like, man, that's the man back in the good old days. And it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. It was 30 years ago. When I was a kid in the 80s, something 30 years ago in the 50s seems like it was ancient. Different people have different conceptions of times, but when the skalds of our people were talking about way back when, in the golden age, back when gods and men interacted in a more direct way, when these fantastical creatures were ever present in life, that period of time, you connect it with as far back as you know. And so you connect it with ancient heroes of the past and ancient times of the past that you can reference, because that makes sense, especially when we didn't have a thorough chronology of, world history. And so when we're looking at some of these things, when we hear the tales of some of these very epic and very ancient heroes, oftentimes their tale is much older than the historical reference points. It's a tale that's been with our folk since that golden age, when the gods and the folk interacted much more hand in hand in that time. And the story comes through to us with, in different ways and different flavors over time. And as I've always advised over here, when we are treating points of knowable history in a historical context, it's one thing. When we're talking about mythic time and mythic history, don't get too caught up in specifics that you miss the point of the story, trying to put it in a time or in a certain flavor, because that very much misses the point. So the story of Völundar goes back into deep antiquity, and it's told in a context of geography that makes sense to the tellers of the story. But don't get too caught up trying to place it in place or in time, because it exists way back in the mists of our ancient memory of our folk.
I don't know if I remember we were reading the reconstruction, the donkey and the wagon wheel book. The name
Wheel and the Donkey.
Yes.
Deep ancestors.
Deep ancestors. And that was one thing. I don't recall him expounding on a smith or a smithy of the gods. Maybe I'm forgetting it, but it's been a while since I read the book, but I could have swore that there was very little mention of that, and the general sense of smithing as being divine. Sometimes it's, of course, it's tossed onto the Dvergar or the Svart Alvar, the spirits of the deep, spirits of matter and energy, and it was taught to us. And then other times it's clearly places a mantle upon a divine or semi-divine being. And I can't recall if he went into that at all in his book. And I thought that was very kind of sad because of the metallurgy that was so intimately connected to the spread of the of our ancestors, the Aryans, or they call them the Yamnaya and the Kurgan, but specifically that generation of folk that were spurned on to migrate because of Bronze Age technology.
All right. So where are we as far as getting into the start of our poem this evening?
Okay, so we're going to start off with a lengthy introduction. We're back to introductions, kind of giving everyone a place orientation. And remember, this story most likely came up through the Anglo-Saxon lands and traveled up through along Denmark and Zealand and into the Nordic lands on the Baltic. And I think that the characterizations of exactly who the kings are and who his daughter and his sons, etc., they have a tendency to change, not drastically, but they do change in various tellings of this story. But again, it may harken back even farther, just like Atli is most likely Attila in Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. It goes very far back. So bear that in mind, or just, take it as it is, just for setting the stage. Let's see. There was a king in Sweden named Nidudr. He had 2 sons and 1 daughter. Her name was Bothvild is how they spell it. Bothvilder, battle willing. There were 3 brothers, sons of a king of the Finns, who was called Slagviv. Another was Egil. The third, Volund. They went on snowshoes and hunted wild beasts. They came into Ulfdalr, and there they built themselves a house. There was a lake there which is called Ulfsjar. Early one morning they found on the shores of the lake 3 women who were spinning flax. Near them were their swan garments, for they were Valkyries. 2 of them were daughters of King Hlothvir. Hlavguð, the swan white, and Höver, the all-wise. And the third was Olrun, daughter of Kjar of Volund. These did they bring home to their hall with them. Egil took Olrun, and Slagfith took Swan White. and Volund took Allwise. There they dwelt for 7 winters, but then they flew away to find battles and to come back no more. Then Egil set forth on his snowshoes to follow Olrun, and Slagfith followed Swanwhite. But Volund stayed in Ulfdalr. He was a most skillful man, as men know from old tales. King Nidud had him taken by force, as the poem here tells. So the intro is really interesting because we broach into the subject of swan maidens. And there's a couple of interesting things about this excerpt. One is their connection to living heroes or kings of the land. Again, these could be allegoric to the gods or to Lord Odin, but they're also said to have come from Volund, which is the generally it's translated as the land of slaughter. Or I, of course, I'm always beating that drum. Remember, Val is also to choose. So it's the land of the chosen. And they come from this place. And much like the Selkies of Irish stories, where the wearing of a seal skin, and then taking it off and taking the shape of a woman, this mimics that. And but I'm trying to see here too. There's mentioning down in the notes, because he translates here, near them were their swan garments, for they were Valkyries. But yeah, it says right. Okay, thought Valru Valkyrur. But I was looking down in the notes, and one of the interesting things that he brought up was that the word that was originally used might have been helmed. And I just now noticed that. So now I'm like, ooh, what is... So I want to kind of go down that rabbit hole. But so these 3 maidens go with the 3 brothers, and they live a life for themselves for 7 years. And then on the 8th year, they, or excuse me, it's the 8th year. 7 winters, but they flew away to find battles on the summer tiding of the following the 7th. And the 2 brothers leave to go find their loves, but Volund remains, and he is captured by Nidud, the king, for his mighty skills. And they reference that again. They say, he's a most skillful man, as men know from old tales. So there's probably a great plethora of stories that did not make it into the compilation that was probably known by the audience. But at the same time, King Nidud and Volund and Mirkwood, etc., these places are oftentimes, most people agree that they're poetic places used for the story and not referencing actual geographical sites. So that's where we go in from here. A slight reiteration in the beginning. In 1, maids from the south through Mirkwood flew, fair and young their fate to follow. On the shore of the sea to rest them they sat, the maids of the south, and flax they spun. So most likely this, I've tried to conceptualize maybe perhaps where Mirkwood might be if it was a geographical site. And the only thing I could think of is the the peat bogs and swamplands of Denmark, which would then make sense that they're coming northward across the Baltic or across the island chains. And they eventually find themselves here, far, far in the north, in the Laplander area, kind of in between northern Sweden and Finland. So they stop and they rest, and they begin to break down flax and start to spin it into thread. And you'll notice in the writings, there's these perforations, these like lines of periods. And these are, again, part of those missing pieces, the fragmentation. So please, bear with, like, to understand into Hlavguð and Hervor, Hlöðvir's children, and Allrun the wise, Kjar's daughter was. So again, there's pieces to it. In 3, one in her arms took ale, then to her bosom white the woman fair. I do, like to reiterate that when we speak about our faith being an ethnic faith, one of the key factors that leans towards an understanding of this is the beauty standards in which women and men are often spoken of. And one of this is, of course, the fairness and the kvitan, the whiteness of the skin. So, when we talk about the fact that our ancestors, especially of Northern Germanic descent, our faith is an ethnic faith, and it is constantly reiterated based on those comparative connections. Other people all over the world may speak about their stories and use beauty standards in relation to their ethnicity and or to economic factors within their social structure or what have you, and it's no different amongst our stories as well. So in 4, Swan white, second, swan feathers she wore, fragmentation, and her arms the third of the sisters threw next round Volin's neck, so white. And again, this might be worth noting. They're not speaking of Volin's neck being white. They're speaking of her arms being white. Again, this was also a sign, and what I mentioned economic is that, the idea of having swarthy arms being burnt by the sun because of long work, whereas having white arms, having arms that were not of, toil, is what's being referenced here. And this is clearly a beauty marker to our ancestors. Fairness of skin. So in 5, and again, this is just reiterating the introduction. There did they sit for 7 winters. In the 8th, at last came their longing again. And in the 9th, so that's interesting too, because the introduction says that just the 7th. In the 9th, did need divide them. The maidens yearned for the murky wood, the fair young maids their fate to follow. And so they depart.
While we have a sec, I want to just acknowledge Monk just donated $100 to Victory Never Sleeps. Thank you so much for that. And a member in the Njordshof district donated $50 to our prison ministry fund and $30 to the Njordshof fund. So thank you so much for that. That moves us a little bit closer.
Awesome. So now we begin to start seeing the foundation towards. This was in the past, and we're moving into more of the present sense, especially when King Neduth becomes, prevalent in the story. But Voland, home from his hunting, came from a weary way, the weather-wise bowman. Slagfith and Ale, the hall found empty. Out and in went they, everywhere seeking. So they come home and they realize that the Swan Maidens have left. The idea, too, again, of hiding the skin or hiding the swan feathers, just as much as like with the Selkie. But there's always a drawing. There's always a yearning by these beings to don the skin and return back. So you can, anybody that's familiar again with Irish folk, and I mean folk with a capital F, stories, can see a clear connection here, and that they may really have been sourced back, because that's where this poem comes from. So the donning of skins and having, let's say, the seal maiden, the swan maiden, may not have been strictly just swans or seals, that those might have been specific based on where the stories were being told or where they were last composed. But this idea of a animal suddenly kind of ungoing of the skin, and it turns out to be a spirit or a being, a female, of magic, and eventually they need to return. So east in 7, east fared Ale after Olrun, and Slagvith south to seek for Swan White. Voland alone in Ulfdalr lay. So he remains in Ulfdale, the Valley of the Wolves. There's a fragmentation here at that last end. And then in 8, red gold he fashioned with the fairest of gems, and rings he strung on ropes of bast. So for his wife he waited long, if the fair one home might come to him. And 9, this is when Neduth learned, the Lord of the Njars, that Voland alone in Ulfdalr lay. By night went his men, their mail coats were studded, their shields in the waning moonlight shone. So right there, you really do see a sense of the Anglo-Saxon poetics kind of really leaning through, with the referencing of the barony, the mail coats, and kind of the under the darkness. They find out that he just can produce these amazing artifacts or items, and so he's going to go up there and snatch him, because he has no one to defend himself other than himself. In 10, from their saddles the gable wall they sought, and in they went at the end of the hall. Rings they saw there on ropes of bast, 700 the hero had. I've often wondered about this part about the gables. From their saddles, the gable wall they sought. And I wonder if this has some reference to perhaps pulling down a wall, by tethering it to their saddles. It's not super clear, or at least I've never perceived it as super clear. But it's then when they enter, they see that he has all of these amazing things. So in 11, off they took him, but all they left save one alone, which they bore away. Now here there is great fragmentations. And in 12, Voland home from his hunting came from a weary way, the weather-wise bowman. A brown bear's flesh would he roast with the fire. Soon the wood so dry was burning well, the wind-dry wood that Voland's was. On the bear skin he rested and counted the rings. The master of elves, that's an interesting point there too, but one he missed, that Hlöðvir's daughter had it, he thought, and the all-wise maid had come once more. So here we kind of see, because of the fragmentation, there's actually kind of a step back, or a telling of what's going to happen from Neithur's men and what they're going to do. And then it kind of overlays back to Völundar returning, and he's has all of these gifts that he's kind of just waiting for his swan maiden to return so that he can adorn her with them. And he is from hunting, killing a bear. And again, I think this emphasizes really more about, in this story, that he is in the Lapland, he is in the Finland, and it's kind of, again, setting that mood. But it kind of hops back that he is counting his riches. He's burning dry wood, which is, I believe, is a compliment for a sign of wisdom. And he thinks that Hlöðvir's daughter, which is one of the swan maids, might be returning, or at least returning soon. So on a bear skin he rested, and he counted his golden rings. The master of elves, there's a couple of times in which Völundar is mentioned as being an Alvar. And again, it's not so simple as to say that he is a mortal now and becomes an Alvar and is just being referred to as his state now, even though the poems in the past. The other is, the theory is that he was taught by the Alvar, and that's why he is a smith. And that could be, of course, Svart Alvar, or the light elves, or spiritual beings, or ancestral beings. But he is, of them, from them. Some people have tried to say, like, no, Wayland or Völundar is Lord Frey, and this is just a story of Lord Frey. And I think that's a bit of a stretch, but instead that this is trying to establish his prowess of being a smith comes from the supernatural.
Well, and keep in mind, guys, this is in the golden age where we have mythic heroes that are more than mortal men of a later age that interact with, that are pursuing relationships with the Valkyrie, and it's told in a proto-history mythic time to where there's overlap between beings that are less than gods, but that exist in kind of a mortal understanding of Midgard. But these heroes are of epic proportions, and they fight monsters and, carry on romantic dalliances with, semi-divine beings. So there's overlap. We see, ascended mortals in that kind of a place when we look at servants of the gods. when we look at Lord Frey's servant that he sent to go deliver messages to what's the servant's name? Man, it's tip my tongue. Skirner. We also see it a little bit in Thor's servants. You see elevated mortals that serve positions of service to our gods in a place that's higher than their mortal state in Midgard. So also when we talk about the term Alf, it's one of those terms that has layered meaning that can mean, male ancestor, but also means, it basically means spirit, and it means like ascended magical being from with magical knowledge from places. The idea of metallurgy and smithing and taking, curious stuff you find in rocks and making jewelry and weapons and armor is a very ancient and primal magic to our folk. And it's one of those things that defined our ancestors as they progressed in the world. Their ability to make stuff out of metal and to continually make superior things out of metal. And that idea of smithing is inherently magical and is understood as such in our lore from ancient times.
So the waning moon and Nidud and his men are moving up to the residency of Voland under the cover of darkness at night, which again kind of also lends to its treachery. They're slowly moving in. Meanwhile, Voland is, in maximum recline mode, and he is on the bear skins, counting his gold rings that he has made, and enjoying his hot fire from the good dried wood that he had the forethought to prepare. And in 14, it states to so long he sat that he fell asleep. His waking empty of gladness was. So you can see here too, Bellows does this quite often. He awakens with no gladness, or he just kind of flips these words around. But that's his waking empty of gladness was. Heavy chains he saw on his hands, and fetters bound his feet together. So he wakes up bound, tied, and imprisoned. And in his own home, no less. Voland speaks in 15. What men are they who thus have laid ropes of bast to bind me now? Then Nidud called, the Lord of the Njars, that's Nidud. How gottest thou, Voland, greatest of the elves, these treasures of yours in Ulfdalr? Again, another reference to him being greatest of the elves. And again, this establishes an argument that some folks could say, but we see this again with Rayin, the smithy in Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, in which he is trained by the Svart Alvar. And I think that connection is really being reiterated here. Let's see. So in 16, Voland speaks again. He says, the gold was not on Grani's way. Far, methinks, is our realm from the hills of the Rhine. I mind me that treasures more we had when happy together at home we were. So here is a specific reference to the Rhine River. And I think that, again, this is the key point that lets us know this is an Anglo-Saxon tale. But wait, it's not an Anglo-Saxon tale. It's a migration period tale. And so you kind of see these lendings, and every time there's added layers to the spiritual essence of this story. And he mined these treasures there in the heartland of the Rhine. And in 17, without stood the wife of Nidhuth wise, and in she came from the end of the hall. Now, excuse me, it's worth noting too, this most likely is that he has now been completely brought back from. So he's no longer at his hall, because you start to see these the introductions of Nidhuth's wife, and I'm not claiming that she was on the raid, and more likely too, it could be a possibility that Nidhuth was not on the raid, but is interrogating his prisoner after he's been brought back. So without stood the wife of Nidhuth the wise, and in she came from the end of the hall. On the floor she stood and softly spoke. Not kind does he look who comes from the wood. And she's speaking of Voland, and in essence, she's saying he looks barbaric. He's probably got shoulder pelts on, charcoal rune paint, one of those mohawk ponytails. It's just, no, kidding. But clearly, of the noble folk, of the people that live in, proper housing and bear proper weapons, he looks like a wild man. King Nidhuth gave to his daughter Bothvild the gold ring that he had taken from the bastrope in Voland's house, and he himself wore the sword that Voland had. The queen spoke. Now you can also see here the numbers start to end. There's a bunchy section in here through translation, and then they restart. But you'll also notice, like in verse 18, it's the same thing. It's the numbers kind of become a little choppy. But yeah, let's see. So he's dispersing the wealth of the smith to his daughter. He's wearing his sword. And again, a sword is of vast importance in this age. Everyone in the audience would know, it takes a lot. It is very expensive to make a sword. So much like a ship. And so to take another man's sword and just, that's mine now, and put it on after all that work, especially if you're the one that made it. And then the queen speaks. 18. The glow of his eyes is like gleaming snakes. His teeth he gnashes, if now is shown the sword or Bothvild's ring he sees. Let them straightway cut his sinews of strength, and set him then in Siverstuff. So at this point, it sets one of the key components to the story is the maiming of Volander. She says, every time he sees the ring that he crafted, every time he sees the sword, he is just glowering at my daughter, and he's glowering at my husband. So how about we do this? We make sure he can't, come at us too fast or get away too fast. We will hamstring him or cut his, either the backs of his legs or possibly his Achilles, so that he can't, move. And then we're going to take him and put him far away in a place where he's of little, threat. And the name Cyver, is like the word sea in English, the ocean. So it's like seastead. So this could, of course, it's like it's referring to like a peninsula or an island. So was it done? The sinews in his knee joints were cut. So most likely the back of the thighs behind the knees. I have heard people suggest that it was the Achilles, or that it was the knees themselves, the front. But most likely it was, he was hamstrung. And he was set in the island of Seastead, was near the mainland, and was called Syverstaff. There he smithied for the king all kinds of precious things. No man dared to go to him, save only the king himself. Voland spoke. And then it switches over to 19. At Nithud's girdle gleams the sword that I sharpened keen with the cunningness of craft, and hardened the steel with the highest of skills. The bright blade far forever is borne, nor back shall I see it, borne to my smithy. Now Bothvild gets the golden ring that was once my bride's. Never well shall it be. So again, reiterating his essence of revenge. His bride was, and his lost love was supposed to get the ring. Now, and again, this part here too, and looking at it even in Old Norse, it's kind of super choppy, and it's just an example of this poem and how it comes out. He sat nor slept. It, most likely would have been written, he did not sit or sleep. But again, the choppiness there. He sat nor slept, and smote with his hammer. Fast for Nithud. Wonders he fashioned. 2 boys did go in his door to gaze, Nithud's sons into Syverstaff. Now this is kind of where it starts to darken. The sons of the, kidnapping and evil king have looked into the workshop of Völundar. And they, in 21, they came to the chest and they craved the keys. The evil was open when in they looked. To the boys it seemed the gems they saw, gold in plenty and precious stones. Volund spoke. Come ye alone the next day, come. Gold to you both shall then be given. Tell not the maids or the men of the hall. To no one say that me you have sought. Don't let anybody know we've talked. Don't let anybody know we've seen. But if you come back, I have plenty more riches for you. Now, there's a fragmentation here in 23, but, most likely the waking in the morning. Early did brother to brother call. Swift, let us go, the rings to see. In 24, they came to the chest and they craved the keys. The evil was open. When in they looked, he smote off their heads, and their feet he hid under the sooty straps of the bellows. So there is the first stroke of Volundar's revenge. he cuts off the heads of the boys and hides them under the bellow press of the large forge. Again, the notes of revenge and the idea of not only being kidnapped in the middle of the night, having your weapon and the ring of your love, taken and kind of flaunted in front of you, but also to be maimed to the point where you can never walk fully again. And then to be enslaved to, make these items for the king who did all that. He's pretty upset.
After you've been maimed and like permanently disabled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is.
But kind of a note here. I don't know if Nick can throw it back up real quick, but the stone carving that we used for today's, I don't know, cover art, I guess, for the episode is cool. And it makes more sense when, because a lot of the imagery of this particular passage is depicted on that. So take a look at that when you get a chance. I thought it was kind of cool. It's a little bit different than how we usually illustrate these.
Yeah. Nick, do you have that image?
Yep, you just put it up.
Yeah,
if you notice there's two bodies hidden behind the forge there with those two tongs.
Yeah, off to the right. Yeah. And it's worth noting that these stone art, like when we were talking about the Völundarkviða a couple of episodes back, correspondence, the idea that, an Icelandic professor, in the story, Hrungnir's heart is 3-sided. And then he takes a stone carving that has a symbol that has 3 sides. And he's like, no, I'm going to suggest that that's Hrungnir's heart. Very rarely did these stone carvings just have misplaced notes of reference. They were often encapsulated. If there's, these kind of symbology of a war, symbology of a sacrifice, and symbology of riding a boat, or, again, it could be alluded to that they're riding a boat beyond the veil or what have you. But yeah, to just take these, it's so noticeable. Like that's a perfect example. It is very, very clear.
That's a thing too. If you're doing a different form of art where it's very, very easy to just add little random stuff to, if you're carving stone, it's very intentional. You don't just accidentally make stone doodles. Like if you're chipping away at and carving into stone, you're doing it very intentionally.
Yeah, I think, and that's why I don't believe that Hrungnir Hart's theory about the Valknot, and we see it again too with in Sigurd the Dragon Slayer when Sigurd is sitting at the fire with Rayan, and this is done on a post-conversion church wall, but it's super clear, and they are eating the dragon's heart on the spit. Because of the intentionality of the carvings, I do not believe that, again, they're making doodles or that they're not placing things in simply for non-reference. Oftentimes, there is meaning. But I did also see
they've got one face of something to put as many significant pieces as they can into one spot. So everything is very intentioned, and it's very dense with references. Because again, they've got, one relatively small space to encapsulate it. It's not like they're illustrating a book. They're in one small area with great effort, putting in maximum amount of density of meaningful things.
Well, you can see it even with Svan's work the amount of open space that's in, say, the Nordhoff mural versus the density of the Baldershoff mural, which is much, much smaller.
Right. Yeah. The ability and time versus and accessibility. And the other thing too is, again, we don't know what that meaning is, but we have a modern meaning of the symbol, just like the Sonnenrod, or the equal armed cross. These meanings of these symbols can affect different groups of people in different regions, let alone different time frames, from our ancestors to now. So that's what I wanted to bring it up when I saw the stone. The choice that Nick had got for this was spot on, and it made me think of a lot of that. But I digress, because we kind of tangent off a little bit. So at this point, they are smote. He has smoted them, and he is starting his plans for revenge. So 25, their skulls, once hid, by their hair he took, set them in silver, and sent them to Nidhuth. Gems full fair from their eyes he fashioned. To Nidhuth's wife so wise he gave them. So there is, if you're speaking of like Gaulish or Celtic, history, especially in the mainland, there is a connection to the beheading of your enemies, or beheading of your foes, and kind of placing them in places, as kind of a point of reference, perhaps as a message. But we see amongst the Norse, particularly, there is a connection to the smoting of one's offspring or one's enemy, and like removing their head and fashioning it into something else, like a bull. This is also lent to in Ale Skalla Grimson's saga, as well, with Erikur, the blood axe. So you can see this as a motif, and again, it really does catch the audience, and it speaks of this is what's going to get. It's a trope of the story that's going to get the audience just really like, oh, this is getting wild. And he places jewels in their eyes, the eye sockets of the skull, and he gives it to them. And from the teeth of the twain he wrought a brooch for the breast. To Bothvild he sent it. So from their teeth he created a brooch, or a bractiat, as it's, I guess, referred to in Roman, bractiate. It is the pin, a cloak pin. And then there's a fragment here in 26. Voland spoke, 27. Bothvild then of her rings did boast, more fragments. The ring I have broken, I dare not say it, save to thee. And Voland spoke, 28. I shall weld the break in the gold so well that fairer than ever thy father shall find it, and better much thy mother shall think it, and thou no worse than ever it was. So here, Bothvild, and in the poem versus storytelling, it can seem very choppy, but the idea, of course, that the children have gone to Seastead to kind of look at the amazing things that Volander has done, and kind of in the way that I've told the stories, that they sneak out there to see the riches, and then they disappear because nobody knew were going. And then when these gifts are given out, it's not fully understood where they're coming from yet. They're just getting the gifts from their smithing slave that they have. But it's then that Bothvild realizes where this comes from, and she chops the ring. And it's not stated how. I mean, I imagine with an axe and a baton, but she cuts the ring, and then goes to him and says, this ring that you had for your, the love of your life, this Valkyrie woman, I've broken it. I ripped it in half. And he's like, I'm a smith. I will fix it, and it will be even better. You can't, it makes no matter. The other point, though, is that it could be that she broke it on accident, but that, it's so fragmentary, it's hard to kind of place where the intention of that is going. In 29, beer he brought, he was better in cunning, until in her seat full soon she slept. So the taking of beer, she's either come to gloat, or she's come to say that it's been broken accidentally. She drinks, or is offered drink, while he goes to fix it. So I guess this would more likely lend that it was accidental, until she passes out. And Volund spoke, "Now vengeance I have for all my hurts, save one alone on the evil woman." There's more fragmentation in 30. And then quoth Volund, "Would that well where the sinews maimed in my feet by Nidhu's men." And again, this is why I brought up the idea that, he was maimed in the backs of his legs, or he was maimed in his Achilles tendon, or perhaps even the very bottom of his feet, is because it shifts around. So he begins the vengeance, or the second part of his vengeance in 31. Laughing Volund rose aloft. Weeping Bothvild went from the isle for her lover's flight and her father's wrath. So if anybody doesn't kind of realize what's going on, it's generally it's pretty. He forced this situation with Bothvild, and she ran to get her father, and to exact revenge against Volander. Without stood the wife of Nidhuth wise, or outside is basically what they're saying, not without, but out of, and in she came from the end of the hall. And you'll notice that that's been repeated again, and that's a poetic meter. But he by the wall in weariness sat. Wakest thou, Nidhuth, the lord of the Nyars? And Nidhuth spoke, 33, always I wake, and ever joyless. Little I sleep since my sons were slain. Cold is my head, cold was thy counsel. One thing with Volund to speak I wish. So now the cat is out of the bag with the return of Bothvild. And that's why I was implying too, is she trying to gloat, or did she do it by accident? Because when she returns, it's all made revealed, unless they, found out or kind of put the pieces together on their own. The choppiness does leave a lot for the storyteller to try to cobble exactly how things are going. But Nidhuth is basically expressing that his evil kingship has brought him no joy. His children are slain, and his greed and his desire has led him to this point. So 34, and again, the assumption is that Nidud has moved to the Isle to Stad. Answer me, Voland, greatest of elves, what happened with my boys that hail once here? And Voland spoke. 35. First shalt thou all the oaths now swear, by the rail of ship and the rim of shield, by the shoulder of steed and the edge of sword, that to Voland's wife thou wilt work no ill, nor yet my bride to her death wilt bring. Thou a wife I should have, that well thou knowest, and a child I should have within thy hall. So one of the big things about this stanza, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are familiar with the placing one's finger on the edge of a blade when taking an oath. The idea here is very clearly stated, and that most likely it was done on many objects, whether it was on an oath ring, whether it was on the edge of a blade, the rim of a shield, or on the edge or the railing of a ship. So again, the unification of a person making oaths or a group of people making oaths and placing their hands upon the edge of something specifically for it to resemble that of that, like an edged piece. We don't know if they did this because of ease of, placing hands, or was it symbolic? Was the edging of an item, the shoulder of the horse, the steel or the ship, was this seen as, a place of fluidity, a place in which, two realms are meeting, if you will, a kind of threshold. But it seems, again, that this is just understood that these are where oaths can often be taken, is on the horse, on the shield, on the rail of the ship. And he says, like, you will not kill me, or my bride to be, or my bride that I wish for. So in the last bit, in 36, seek thy smithy thou didst set. Thou shalt find the bellows sprinkled with blood. I smote off their heads of both thy sons, and their feet neath the sooty straps I hid. Their skulls once hid, by their hair I took, set them in silver and sent them to Nidud. Gems full fair from their eyes I fashioned, to Nidud's wife so wise I gave them. So again, this is just reiterating and kind of taking the meter from before and placing it in here again. And from the teeth in 38, of the twain I wrought, a brooch for the breast of Bothvild I gave it. Now big with child does Bothvild grow, the only daughter ye two had ever. So again, there's the confirmation of the deception and forcefulness that Voland has committed on them as well. And Nidud speaks, never spakest thou a word that worse could hurt me, nor that made me, Voland, more bitter for vengeance. There is no man so high from thy horse to take thee, or so doughty an archer as down to shoot thee, while high in the clouds thy course thou takest. Laughing Voland rose aloft, but left in sadness Nidud sat. And I wanted to read those two parts together because this is the part in which fashioned of metal wings, and this is not really emphasized in the poem, but it is emphasized elsewhere, that he leaves via metal wings rising aloft, and that no archer can shoot him down, and he flies away while Nidud is left, just holding his head in his hands at the doom that he wrought upon himself. In 41, then spake Nidud, Lord of the Niars, rise up, Thrakreth, best of my thralls, bid Bothvild come, the bright-browed maid, bedecked so fair with her father to speak. Again, another beauty standard, of course, was not having a swarthy or wrinkled or sunburnt forehead. And that's what he means by bright-browed maid. 42, there's fragmentation there. And is it true, Bothvild, that which was told to me? Once in the Isle with Voland wert thou? Bothvild spoke. True it is, Nidud, that which was told thee. Once in the Isle with Voland was I, an hour of lust, alas, it should be. Not was my might with such a man, nor from his strength could I save myself. It's pretty kind of clear in that relation, and it was, again, part of his vengeance plan. And then it very abruptly ends. So there is a lot that's not, being said in relation to Deor and in relation to I immediately forgot it. Let me see. I had it written up here. Thedric's saga. These, the speaking of what Wayland or Volander is doing and has done kind of fills in, I think, a great amount of the gaps, or that in essence, this may have been like the Nordic version of a story. We know that our Nordic ancestors could very easily understand the Anglo-Saxon language, even up to Iceland. Egil Skallagrimsson could speak amongst the Angles because their language was so close to each other. So, whether the gaps are grammatical and problematic there, or whether or not it's simply this is the North version of the story, is kind of hard to determine. But yes, he flies, and she is left with a baby, and then it abruptly ends. And again, in the Nordic version, it doesn't really fully speak of the wings, if you will. But yes, Thredric's saga has a more of a fuller account of the entirety of the story. And in this, there's more players. Neither's brother is involved, and then he collects the feathers from arrows, and that's what he makes wings out of, or he uses them to cast wings in or smelts them or coats them in iron. There's a lot of different kind of takes on that story as to kind of how it went about. So I know it's fragmentary, and I know that it's kind of hard to pin down, but this is absolutely one of those stories that reflects like kind of heroic dramas. It's a back and forth, and but it again speaks of an elevated being, Völundar, and his kind of escapade or just bombastic story of him in the mortal realm.
So, man, it's unfortunate this saga's got so much stuff missing and isn't as complete as it should be. Sure. But what's really, I don't know, reassuring and makes it significant is recognizing its commonality to our folk. There's versions of it in Anglo-Saxon England, in Iceland, in the Nordic countries, in continental Germany. There's lots of different references to this clearly common hero of our folk that is from a time and place that predates, our separation, at least at those points, which takes it into, the migration era at least. So it's really interesting when we get some of these stories that are very, very old, and some of these characters that occur in a lot of different contexts, a lot of different places, because it speaks to their significance culturally and to, their long existing memory amongst our folk. And that's powerful. And it's a point of connectivity that, I don't think we necessarily need more reassurance of the, pan-Aryan nature of a lot of these things, but this certainly speaks to that in, the pan-Germanic realm for certain. And so I think that's really important. I think it's a cool version of the story. As we go through more lore and more things, there's little bits here and there that get added to it. The image of him overcoming and fashioning through time, through effort, through perseverance, his vengeance and his own ascension. The imagery of him ascending and laughing on wings of his own creation as his foe is left devastated, lamenting, all the vengeance that was wrought upon him for his misdeeds, is a powerful image that's, expressed here in perhaps a more poignant way than any of the other fragments and pieces of this story. And I think that's the really cool take home from it.
Yeah, the connection to Dayor is also interesting because it's only mentioned in 2 stanzas, but still worthy of being mentioned. If anybody, there is an interesting retelling of Dayor and also a song of Dayor being performed. It's a very old video. It came out many, many years ago. But yeah, it's very interesting. You can find the lyrics for it or the poem itself listed, and you can read right there amongst there that Wayland tasted misery amongst the snakes, and his stout-hearted hero endured troubles and sorrow and the longing as his companions, cruelty cold as winter. He often found woe. Once Neithath instead of neither laid restraints upon him. Supple sinews bound on the better man than went by, so can this. So in that sense too, with Dayor, it talks about suffering. It talks about being wronged and I think that had a greater emphasis, probably too, even in the stories, is that there is this emphasis that, you have this, strong and mighty Lord that is in love, and then his love leaves him. So it was cursed to begin with in reality since the beginning. And as he's waiting for her to return, he's, shackled and taken away and forced to create these, magnificent pieces. And he's just slowly burning. And again, it's also worth noting too that the situation with Bodvild as the daughter of the king, she appears as like the victim, but there's also versions in which she is simply Wayland's wife, or that he takes her as a wife and becomes the mother of Vivga. That's in Friedrich Saga. So again, these placements do change, just like we spoke about with like Saxo Grammaticus's take on Lord Odin and Rinder, where it's said that he forcefully takes her in that, but then in the Eddas, he states that it was to commence the birthing of the god of vengeance, Vauli.
So appreciate you guys being with us as we went through the story. As it sits now, we have got one question from the Wolf Throne. Do you believe in the Yugas? And do you believe humanity was once a utopia during the Krita Yuga? Perhaps it was the age of the Hyperboreans. Before we get to it, Nick wants me to plug shirts. We got shirts.
I'm going to step away for 1 second.
Okay. So we've got some Njordshof merchandise here. Hoodies, gym shorts, tank tops, various stuff. It's exciting, looks cool. Get yourself some while the getting's good. We've got some really cool merchandise, and it's been really high quality, nice stuff so far, so that's awesome. We're still figuring out our situation on it, so no telling how long we're going to have things, these specific items at least, so get yours while the getting's good. As far as the Yugas go, I don't. So there are things that happen cyclically, and I think that's just the nature of reality. But what's much more important to me is what to do with that. According to my understanding of the Hindu concept of the Yugas, I mean, the current Yuga that we're in started in tens of thousands of years BC, 100, like they're impossibly long for us to even fathom. And it's really hard to know because it's based on, I don't know what they base their math on, but I think there's been a lot of different folks in the world that recognize cyclical things that happen in time. There are macro cycles, there are micro cycles, there are cycles within your own life, there are cycles within the life of a nation, there are cycles within the life of a race, there are cycles within, the planet, there's cycles within the cosmos. There are cyclical things, and I don't want to suggest that there aren't. But what good does that do if they're massive? Wherever we're in is where we are. Were things better at one point in the distant past? Certainly. And we talk about that here. We talk about that golden age where these heroes existed in kind of a realm where the folk and the Aesir were much closer together and interacted in a much more direct way. And I think we see that in all our mythos, that at one point in the far back in a golden age, those things were better. I think conceptually, we seek to bring about a golden age in the things that we do. We long for a macro golden age, but in the meantime, it's our job to fashion for ourselves our own ascendancy, much like the wings of Völundar in the times that we have. You know, if we find ourselves in the wolf age, and if this is in fact that time, then it's our job to fashion our ascendancy within what we have, within the husk of what we have. And so we can create our own golden age within the husk of the wolf age, if that's where we find ourselves. There's certainly something to those cycles, but like I said, the Kali Yuga was supposed to start before our current understanding of history even starts civilization, and it goes past the time we live in. So what do we do with that information? If there was a golden age, 5 times longer than humanity has got any history to record, that's cool and it's interesting to contemplate, but it doesn't really affect what we do with the rest of our lifetimes. We have the hand that we have, and whatever age we find ourselves in, it's our job to bring it closer to that golden age and closer to the ideal condition. And we all have utility to do that. And I don't think it really answers your question the way you asked it, but I think it's more important to contemplate what we do with it. When people, and I've talked to a number of people like this, when they reason that, we're in the Kali Yuga, whatever, like they throw their hands up and they do nothing, and they waste their utility that they have in this life to accomplish anything because we're in the Kali Yuga, and they don't really stop and think about what that means, or that all of the history they know about of humanity exists in the Kali Yuga. All of the times they look back to it like, man, that was awesome. I wish I lived back then. That was all technically in that Yuga if you follow that system. So it is a very, very easy excuse for escapism and for not doing good things and not building. And there's such a tremendous potential for accomplishment around us that whatever age we find ourselves in is relatively irrelevant, because it is what it is. And the question before us is, what do we do with it? And undoubtedly, each of the ages presents a different set of opportunities and a different set of challenges. So to be aware of that, I think, is reasonable. But to we'll wait it out. Maybe our 10th great grandchildren will they'll just time it out and find themselves in the golden age, is a gross abdication of our responsibilities. What are your thoughts on that, Svan?
Oh, he also Wolf Throne mentioned too that there are many golden ages within the Kali Yuga, but I'm not familiar enough with Vedic branch of Aryan faith, or I can't speak well enough about the yugas. So to answer the question plainly, I do believe in cycles. I don't know about the yugas, but I do believe in runic, that the Futhark is cyclical in its nature, and that it speaks of ages, that each rune is kind of like an epoch of time. This was taught to me by my rune teacher, John Wagner, who was with a group called the Nematon very long time ago in the 60s and 70s. And he spoke of the idea that each of the runes represents these kind of epochs of time, and oftentimes they could cycle within themselves, and that upon learning from him in the like mid to late 90s, he spoke of very clearly in his belief that we were in the age of the sun, in Sowilo, the age of awakening. And I mean, he lent towards ideas that were pretty consistent with awakening, the coming of Asatru, the connection that Founder McNallen had, that these great movements towards the lights kind of turning on. And before he passed away, he even said, you will probably witness the turning from the epoch of the sun into the age of Tiwaz, into the age of Tir. And I was like, how would I even know that? And again, he left a very cryptic point. He just said, when it happens, you will know. And I think that Sigerheim and its foundation, I think that, and this again was long before I joined the Asatru Folk Assembly, is the fact that Tiershoff is being placed there at the Capitol, is, I think, a sign of that coming age. So for me, I do believe in ages, I do believe in cycles, but I think mine are a lot more very intimate and very real in the sense it's kind of hard. I don't quantify it in years, but I'm standing on the precipice of jumping into the next epoch, just based off of kind of getting a chance to peek behind the great wisdom that this man had that taught me about runes. And I told Asatru about that, and I was very unsure. I didn't know what to think. I thought the man was kind of crazy a lot of the time, but it was fortuitous before I said anything. Everything was falling into pieces, and I just wanted to share that with Asatru. Like, this is something that I was told a long time ago. I didn't know what to make of it, and now all of this is happening, and I couldn't. It floored me, and it has been one of those really strong kind of pythons of faith that was set once I had heard that Asatru was buying the land, and that one of the temple that was going to be there. So I do believe in cycles, and that brings us to other thoughts like, what does the age of Tyr look like? How does the cycle repeat itself? And how long are cycles, if we're speaking about, in the beginning of the Futhark, where there's expansion and, there's the creation of matter. These, must be massively long cycles. So how long was the cycle of the sun? And I've thought about it, but it's just too hard to hammer out, I think.
So to kind of tie up both things, cycles are real and they happen all around us. And that's one of the things I've mentioned before too. One of the roots of our magical practice is being spiritually attuned to the tapestry of earth and how that is woven, in doing right action at the right time, getting in the flow of how things ought to be, aligns with that and allows for things to flourish the way that they should. That said, an awareness of those things doesn't necessarily change your action and what you do, no matter where you find yourself in those cycles. Things happen cyclically. You need to position yourself to be in the right place at the right time to capitalize on those things. But that said, no part of the cycle is the right time for you to just sit out and wait and adorn grandma's couch. Consistently pushing forward and putting your shoulder to the wheel, moving it forward, living nobly positions you best to when something works fortuitously within the course of cycles to capitalize on it. If opportunity presents itself and, we're waiting it out on mom's couch playing Call of Duty or whatever we're doing instead of building and making things happen, we often miss those opportunities to capitalize on that and to ride the cycles that are going to bring us closer to victories. So being aware of cycles is fine, but your awareness of the cycle doesn't change your obligations to do right and fear no one. That's your obligation in the lowest point of a wolf age and in your highest point of a gold age. Our next question. My sister is going through a pretty serious crisis and reached out and asked me about my faith and expressed interest in it. How do I help guide her home to our faith and our gods without feeling like she's just using it as a coping mechanism and not a legitimate interest in the faith? So I would actually, Svan, what are your thoughts on this first?
I read some of the comments later too. It said, let me see. Actually, it's further low. Yes, thank you, fellas. This is Alexander James. It's been quite vexing as she is, for better or worse, still a hardcore Catholic, but today asked me about my offerings to Air. Air, of course, is one of the Alseigneur. If anybody needs to know, she's the, we pray to her for healing. She is the source of, benevolence that certainly sources from the gods. And yeah, I can't emphasize enough that when it comes to Catholics and Christians, in a general sense, I do not ever recommend that you go into ancestral worship. And the reason why is it's kind of sad. Christianity teaches that every individual's soul is on the market, and unless they follow the XYZ of the covenant to Yahweh, they're not getting into the afterlife. They're not getting to sit at the knee of Yahweh. So great grandma could be just a great woman, and just exemplify all these great virtues, but she didn't do X, Y, and Z. So going straight to Gehenna. And I prefer to use Gehenna instead of the word they stole, hell. But yeah, so you got to be careful with that, because some of that is viewed, and I know biblically too, they speak about, worshiping your ancestors as being a pagan practice. What you're starting to do, though, with Aer is very reminiscent to what they naturally are inclined to do when they go towards Mary worship. That is the Asatru coming out of them. That is their need to have the polaric genders of the gods expressed again. It can't be contained for forever. So, they are much like what Wiccans do. They'll have a masculine and a feminine, but you can really tap into specifics, or, again, building a relationship there. Focus on Air. The other thing I would say is, again, community is good, and showing her that there's a community out there, getting out to a community or building a community near you is extremely important. But If she is of a faith that is heavily framed around prayer, you can focus on home too, until she's ready to move into community. Community might be a little too jarring at first. But then, if she works on perhaps building her own harrow, which as a Catholic she may be used to doing, and there, she can go through processes. You could show her how to light a flame, how to ring, a bell and announce. You could show her how to speak out and ask the gods to be present. You could show her about the way that we do, in essence, communion. We pour a horn of mead as we say a prayer, and we pour it into a clout bowl, and then the clout bowl is then given over as a gift to the gods, or a specific god or goddess. So you could start out small, doing home, ceremonies, perhaps doing them with her, build some connection with her, show her how a bloat is done with just a simple harrow. All you really need is a horn and a clout bowl. Everything converges to that moment when you place the gift of your piety, your love, your might into that mead, and you place it into that bowl. The moment it transfers into the bowl is when it transfers to the gods, and that's the starting point. You could get her to read about the gods, and then I would say eventually just bring her into community, and then introduce her to ancestral, making amends to, with sometimes if there's maybe modern ancestors or like closely related ancestors that she needs to kind of work through, you could, do that as well. But I would think firstly focus on divine Asenir. I think that Catholics, strangely enough, are one of the most pagan European expressions that have, existed in Europe, despite the fact that, they claim Christianity and they claim to hold the covenant of their God. It is extremely European paganism. And so there's not too far of a stretch for you there. It's just that the other thing is, while you're doing all of this, you need to address their fear of Gehenna. The religion is really, really built on that caveat that if they stray away from Yahweh, they will be punished severely. And that's going to be your biggest hurdle. And that doesn't matter if they're Catholic or, Protestant or Orthodox. It doesn't matter. Deprogramming them away from that kind of Semitic enslavement mentality is going to be your biggest hurdle.
Yeah, so there's lots and lots of right ways to do it, and you know your sister better than we do. But just a variety of options. Svan gave you some. I want to start where he left off. You are in luck. Catholicism is super duper pagan.
Yeah.
They don't think that they are, but they are absolutely pagan. Worship of saints, worship of Mary is literal idolatry. The reverence towards relics, all of those things are super duper pagan. So that mindset, like if you label it that causes a mental, issue. But if you don't, that's something ingrained and very natural, that's been allowed to flourish under Catholicism, just under a thin guise of being something else. So I think that positions things really well. What I would say the biggest thing to get her to do is to not judge her feelings and her reactions on things. Don't try to stop the process if she's like, oh, it's probably just me rationalizing. No, stop. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, pause. Don't do that. Does this make, how does this make you feel? Okay. So if this feels okay, let's see. Let's learn more about this. Encourage her all the time on it. You're not going to convince her academically to abandon one faith for another faith, or to embrace and have a sincere relationship with the ICER through, logical debate. That's not how things work. It's especially not how things work with women, but I also don't think it's how things work with, sincere piety. What you need to get her to do the best you can is be in a spot where she's open to see, hey, I don't know, but I will give it a shot. I will be open. I'll be open-minded and have an open heart and see what's what. Okay, fine. And I would, her situation better than I do, but demonstrating how real Asatru is to you through example is really important. Not through telling her that it's super important to you, but by showing her how important it is to you and what positive effects it has on your life. That is really good. Inviting her to, and I don't know where you're located. If you're near a Hof, fantastic. That's an ideal situation. Bring her to the Hof. If you're not, and you get together with other Asatru or whatever context that is, invite her to come with you. Don't force her to be part of any ritual if she doesn't want to. And when I say force, don't pressure her to, but invite her to. And she might want to, or she might just observe you and the people you're with treating it very seriously. And wow, these are really nice people. Wow, these are good people, and they really believe the things that they're doing. Hey, I felt like something special was going on there. And maybe next time she goes and participates. These things start slow, so I don't think there's any need to push any of it, but invite her to participate at whatever level she'd like. Invite her to be around it. And when she's around it, to be open to it and open-minded towards it. And it sounds like that opening has already occurred. A crack has occurred. So allowing and encouraging that door to open more and more is going to be a really good way to let her see how real it is without trying to convince her or get her engaged intellectually, because it's not about that. So yeah, invite her and encourage her to be part of things and see where it goes. The next question, and this is I am half Scottish with a mix of Welsh, English, Portuguese, and Native American. Would Asatru be right for me?
Yes.
Well, so here's the thing. Are you really? There is a overwhelming Cherokee princess phenomenon in the United States where every family in the South, their great grandma was Cherokee. No, she wasn't. And in your case, I don't know, maybe she was. But 9 times out of 10, no, she wasn't. Somebody in your family just made that up because it was cool at one point to pretend that. So are you really? How Native American are you? Is that a family legend, or, are you a heap big Native American? Like, what is the truth of that? Look in the mirror and what do you see? I think it's very common to hear those things or think those things in the United States. I don't know if that happens other places, but, For example, Elizabeth Warren, super duper Native American. She is a proud Native American. Not a drop of Native American in her. She just made that up. Honestly, probably not. One of her family members probably made that up. And it sounded cooler to her than recognizing that she is a white woman. You telling me that you are Scottish, Welsh, English, and Portuguese with some Native American tells me you're probably a white person like the rest of us. But if you think that you're Native American and you identify yourself as Native American, whether you are or you aren't, that's not welcome in the Asatru Folk Assembly, because we're about our commonality, not, one drop of real or imaginary Native American ancestry. So when you say all that, if you're 50% Native American and the rest is your European mixture of these other things, then no, Asatru is not right for you. But I think an honest self-reflection of what your true ancestry is, and do you look like you're Native American or do you look like the rest of us? There's a truth in that. And I know that the actually crowd or the skull caliper guys don't like that, but there is a profound biologic truth that, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, probably a duck. That's the thing to ask yourself. But again, if you're Elizabeth Warren and you're like, hi, I'm I don't know what she pretends her Indian name is, but whatever it is, if you introduce yourself as, hi, I'm the Sioux chief, whatever, then no, that's not going to be welcomed. And that's going to immediately cause an ostracism between you and between us. So give that some thought and look in the mirror and see what looks back at you. And make sure that that's what looks back at the rest of us too. Go ahead. Of course. Do you guys have Cherokee princesses in Iceland?
No. I think it's like there's not even a sense of like who's closer to Norwegian at all in Iceland. It's just that's not really there. The one thing I was going to say, or actually two things. One is that I have a very close friend who has worked in the genetic, she works for Ancestry. And one of the things that she had always kind of emphasized was anything under 5% is comparative. There's not actually a substantive connection between those people. They just compare. And again, it can be based on migrations. It can be based on a lot of different things through that area. There were people there once, and now there are not people there, but you share a commonality or something of that nature. So anything under 5%, we really find that a lot. I think our enemies want us to, if you got 2%, I don't know, like Pacific Islander, Micronesian, and you got 2%, it starts to cast doubt in people's minds as to where they stand. But I think, and we've said this before, you've said this before, do you look like us? Do you identify as us? That's the first steps towards, coming into our community. When we look at you, do we see that commonality with ourselves? Those are huge factors. We're not stating in any way there's like a denying of perhaps what your lineage before has done. If somebody in your family married outside of the folk, okay, but here we are. Are you, of us, look like us, and identify with us? Because people get that purity spiraling so heavy. And I think that's what our detractors want. They want
And
us
they
to be
intentionally
divided.
do that. They have admitted, different companies have admitted to throwing in on white people's DNA like 2% sub-Saharan Africa. That doesn't even make sense. For that to genetically be the case, there was no contact between most white people's ancestors and sub-Saharan Africans far enough back for that to be a possibility of 2%. That's not even real. But they do take commonality. So just to point out a thing that Wolfthrone said that's kind of a fallacy people take. He said Spaniards are 10% Arabic, but they're not. Some Spaniards certainly are. Some Spaniards are 50% Arabic. Some Spaniards are 0%. But on the total, on the whole, perhaps Iberian peoples are 10% on the total of Moorish ancestry. But that doesn't mean that every individual is. And some people are much more so, and some people are much less so. Some people are none, some people are all. So when we deal with those as far as like what areas of the world share your genetics, it gets dicey because it compares across a baseline commonality and not your individuality. So don't get hung up on that. You know who you are. You know what box you check when you're filling out an application or a health questionnaire. You know these things. Let common sense guide you and don't let 3% dissuade you from 97%, especially when it's theoretical. But don't get lost in the sauce on it. So, next question: have you ever been physically attacked by a demon? And do you think there's any validity to the people who claim to have been attacked by demons and have scratch marks to show for it? Svan, did demon ever come get you?
No, and yes. No to I have never been attacked by a willful spirit with malicious intent. However, I do believe that they exist. I have seen a fair enough of evidence and testimony that I would believe that there are. In our faith, I think that they would be classified as a troll, but a troll doesn't really work because now people think of cutesy kid shows. Another name that would be very fitting is thirser, a thirse, a being, a remnant, kind of produced from the realm of resistance, Jotunheim, the realm of dissipation and venom that flows out of there and finds itself nestling into a deep, dark crack in the whether it's the spiritual desert or the quite physically an outlanding place, and they're just again, as a Jotnar of the middle, they're not the Hrimthurser of Niflheim. They're not the sons and daughters of Muspel. These particularly are egregious, and they remember the fact that the gods slayed Ymir and gave us Ond, and they hold a lot of malice, and they again slip into these cracks. One of them recently that I was just reading about was in Edinburgh, Scotland. There is the Black Mausoleum in the cemetery, the Grey Friar Kirkyard in Edinburgh, and there's a long history there about a Protestant lord who tortured, maimed, and killed these groups called the Covenanters, and it was terrible what he did, especially to his own countrymen. But again, that's Protestant Catholic wars. And a lot of people try to say that that's his spirit, but I think Thurser or trolls are drawn to places of great suffering. And that's what often draws them out of their places in the wilds. And so, yeah, so I do believe in them. I think that so much so our ancestors had a word for a binding magus or, you know, a Galderman, which would do word locking, and that the word varðlokker, the idea of someone who traps and binds these spirits and removes them from a place. But again, I've never encountered them. I would be fascinated to go to like the Black Mausoleum. There was a story too in relation to that. There was a Christian of some denomination who went there to perform exorcisms, and he died shortly after his attempt at the exorcisms. He was doing all of his things, and it didn't matter. It didn't work. I don't know if he was a priest. I don't think he was a Catholic priest, but he may have been like an Anglican priest. But he went there and attempted to exorcise the area, and he fell at the end, and he was exasperated and sweating, and he said his last words were, "This is going to kill me." And strangely enough, the picture that was taken right before he fell shows a shadowy figure in the window of the mausoleum behind him. And so spooky and crazy stuff. I'm very interested in the paranormal. I'm also very conscientious about how the Catholic Church and actors for the Catholic Church have used paranormal to push their ideologies. But I believe Thurser are out there, and they can be a threat, if you will. But to the exact parameters. But I mean, people call them demons, people call them poltergeists or what have you.
So we call them haints.
Haints.
Now, no, but very seriously, we believe in gods. We believe in Valkyria. We believe in the Filia. We believe in our dead ancestors interacting with us. It's naive and illogical not to think that there are malevolent things that exist in the spiritual realm as well, or in the non-corporeal realm as well. Those things exist. There are things that are specifically, that we have a cultural context for, but we exist in a world where other stuff exists. Our lore talks about wolves and walruses and Northern European stuff, but if you go to Africa, a lion's still going to get you if a lion wants to get you. Just because it's outside of our cultural context doesn't mean it's not a real thing that can bite you. So different religions may have different words for, bad hoodoo that's after you, but those kind of things exist. I'll posit, and so malevolent spiritual entities exist, and malevolent, humans beyond the veil, or living things beyond the veil exist. If a type of creature that victimizes and treats you bad in corporeal interaction, might spiritually come to steal your bike also. You don't know. Stuff happens. Well, what I'm saying is, though, one of the really important things about Asatru that I think is fundamental and I think is often lost. We view ourselves as outside the system, and we shouldn't. I think we as a people tend to do this a lot with nature. We act as if nature exists somewhere else, and we're like observers of nature, as opposed to we're within the system of nature. We're part of nature. The same thing exists spiritually. We treat all of this stuff like it's other and like it's this completely foreign interaction. And it's not. We have life experience. We know how to interact with other sentient creatures. Just because they exist in a spiritual plane shouldn't make us terrified and all of a sudden feel off balance and out of our element. In fact, the more you do so, the more you give them the opportunity to be scared. Look at creatures and all types of creatures. If you act all scared around them, they tend to victimize you. If they're on 2 legs or 4, if you act like you're scared of them, you open the door. They would much rather attack soft targets than people that look like they're, they can handle themselves. Do the same thing spiritually. Be spiritually strong. Don't carry yourself like a victim, and that helps. Now, this is a long way. I absolutely think that they're, like I said, are the spirits of dead people that are, ghosts that are a thing. When it's amazing how when we interact with grandma at the altar, that's a thing and it makes sense and it's warm and fuzzy and it's nice. But if we're in a place and there's another interaction with a dead person, that's terrifying and we treat them poorly. And I don't think that's right. Same thing is true with a lot of things. So there's ghosts, and we've been through that. But there's also malevolent spiritual forces that, for whatever reason, attach themselves to people or places. Sometimes that's opened up through, stupid ritual things that people do that they think is silly, that folks on the other side may not think is quite so silly. I think when you open yourself up to things, good night, baby. Come here, give me up. All right. Okay. I'll come in and see you in just a second. All right. So, anyways, those things exist and they look to take advantage of things. And when you look into the abyss, sometimes the abyss looks back. If you, go through your goth phase and you set up your little pentagram thing and you try to summon stuff, most of the time I think that's silly. Some of the time I think something comes through and you're inviting chaos into your life and chaotic forces come in and damage happens. I've known of groups of people that I don't think take it seriously, but because it's dark and spooky and cool, will do ritual to interact with Jormungand or Fenrir or things like that. I've seen those same people. I've seen their lives spiral into ruin, and really bad things happen to them and their loved ones because they've invited that force into their life. So it's absolutely a real thing. I've been involved in helping cleanse spaces of haints, for lack of a better term, or helping people to try to stave off haints and such in their life. I believe very much that they exist and are real. But no, haints don't want none of this. I have not I've not experienced negative spiritual forces interacting in my life in a way that I can perceive or am aware of. I'll say this too. This is important to me to not come on here and BS you guys. And I always try to be really mindful of that. Like, I'm not going to tell you something that's not true. I wish that I had the ability to perceive these things in a way that other people do. I think I have the ability to interact with these things, but to perceive them, not so much. But I've known people who have, that talk to me about them and their reactions to me or my reactions to them or whatnot. And I find that really, really interesting. And again, it depends on who's saying it and on how much I buy into it or not. But I very much believe those are things. And I think that, you know, just because you can't perceive them doesn't mean they can't perceive you. I think if they're forces that you would recognize that have enough power to mess with your life, however it works on the other side, I think maybe it's, you know, like a interrogation mirror or whatever, to where you can't see through it, but it can see through you. So keep that in mind too. But no, it's not an exact science. You know, maybe one day Asatru will have our own insert Old Norse word here for demonologist. But those things exist. They exist regardless of culture.
As her go, you're coming in kind of choppy and pixelated.
Uh-oh. Perhaps my hates is trying to vex me right now.
Yeah, this has happened to me too before when I was speaking of like Thurser, etc. And
at least for this, I can say it's on Matt because you're perfect. You're loud and clear, Svan.
Okay, yeah, Evil Monk is saying I'm frozen.
It's strange because I'm coming in really good on mine. My Wi-Fi is supposedly really good. And again, so this is just something to note. It's funny when you mention these things enough, then little stuff starts to happen.
Yeah.
For whatever that's worth. So looks like we've got another. I've got a 3-part thing coming through. Go ahead, Svan.
I was gonna say if you wanted to put Obs to bed, I was gonna expound on one thing in relation to the question we were just talking about with the Hagaziza or the witch when we do Nornir's Knot. I figured that would be a good time to kind of segue. You're coming in clear now, but the one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that there's a lot of things that are substantiated in our faith that is in relation to things that perhaps lay members might not correlate with. The Thurser to the demon, if you will. And another Thurser that is really prevalent is the Hagazisa, or the foul, the witch. But we don't say witch. Witch is kind of a broad term, like Alvar or Disir. In reality, Disir and witch share a commonality and function. It's the spinning of fate. It's the spinning of the threads of fate. So, you know, I kind of prefer to use the word like hag or, just a hexa or a hagaziza. And these formulations are a key component to one of our holy tides. Nornir's Knot or Hexanacht or Volsberganacht. That holiday, that holy tide, is really about the menfolk are gearing up to go out, and the women folk weave clothing that protects them, burns herbs over them that protects them. So in essence, they're kind of using their magic to fight this specific form of thirst. Thirsts of this type, the hag, are feminine in nature, and again, our faith is always gendered, and so this applies just as much to them. The outsiders, the Jotuns of the middle, the kind of the scourers of the dark. You know, you have Thursers, and then you have the Hags, and the Hags are, you know, they delight in anything that throws against the sanctity of femininity, that throws against the sanctity of womanhood. You can kind of see the way they work their, you know, ill magic in the world is by making a mockery of these things. And so, you know, I would say the reason why I wanted to bring it up is that they're quite prevalent, because Thurser, I think, are pretty rare. The chances of you know, running into or encountering an entity like that is extremely rare, but more so to encounter Hag or Hag or Hagaziza. They are so prevalent in our society today. I think that, and again, a lot of people will try to say, oh, you're just, you know, demonizing or, you know, villainizing womanhood. No, in actuality, they villainize, they make a mockery of all that is feminine, and what it means to be a woman. That's all part of that. But you know, you have these beings, and it's happened to me before. I remember speaking to my brother-in-law about our faith, and we were talking about this, and all the, like, the lights started kind of turning off in the house and stuff. You know, we don't particularly look at, say, Loki as a devil. He is bound. He is an exemplification of kinslaying. He is the, you know, the one that's brought into the heavenly realm, and you know, eventually turns against the Aesir in the worst way, and he is bound. But what does exist is, again, the throng of foul that comes from Jotunheim. And I've spoken about this on other VNSs. The middle world is surrounded on all sides. You have the Leos Alfheim, the realm of light, Svart Alfheim, the realm of energy and matter being, you know, compressed and transferred. And then you have Vanaheim, it's the source of life, even down to the tiniest little tardigrade or what have you, that life that continues and moves in. And then eventually, all things do have to kind of pass. So the cycle of life and death, natural law, comes from Vanaheim. And what comes from Jotunheim, and it again is right in the middle with us, is resistance, dissipation, what we could in essence consider venom, like venom going in and the retraction of that which is left. I mean, there's a reason why Mimmir's well is in Jotunheim. Time, all time, kind of exudes into that realm. And so there's this symbiotic relationship between all the realms that needs to happen. Life needs resistance. It needs dissipation in order for it to grow and become stronger. But what comes out of this realm on top of that are resistant forces like the Hagazisa and the Thurs. And so we do have these in our faith. I have never had been called to, fix something of that nature. I don't know to how much it could be that, say, the hammer of the soul is able to affect things in our world, even though the soul has passed on, because we do know that there are parts of the soul that remain here. And so I don't know fully, when people say it's a poltergeist, and they're generally referring to a person that once lived there, and I would be untruthful to say that I did know 100%. But again, I think that whatever those entities are that lurk kind of on the edges of things, they do, like Alcere said, they prey on weakness. They prey on tormented families. They prey on families that have lost their the strength of them, whether it's the father or the mother or the children. Once there's a kind of a break in that, so it's very important that we tend to our garter, we tend to our family, we make sure that our faith is strong in the gods and in our ancestors. And the last point I wanted to make is, so if we have all of these Thursur and Hagazizas flying around and so on and so forth, where do the gods fit in all of this? I know that Christianity has some odd explanations for these kind of belief systems. But in reality is that our holy gods are residing in heaven, and they're also residing in Vanaheim as a source of life. But those priorities are built around interaction. I think we interact far more with Vanaheim and light elves or Alvar or Landvatir that are connected to Vanaheim. However, our holy gods do interact, and I think they are far larger and more encompassing than the middle world. They interact through that well in heaven. So their placement in the world is, it can be as active as, I think it's been shown in stories, but I think with great power. Otherwise, it seems to me that the holy gods interact with the physicality of the world, with the spirituality of the folk, and with the general cosmic sense through the well of earth, that well that is in heaven, and it descends down into that our middle world. So do they keep track of every single being? No, it's that in essence, that's the Nornir doing that as they track the fates of men and all beings in the middle world. But can they aid us in banishing these forces? I believe 100%, but it does also require us to step up, us to bolster ourselves. And, so reaching out to a Gothar and having them to cleanse your home, to help you take your Garther back, to do the land taking or land nama, that is, massively important. I think if ever you run into that situation, please reach out to the Gothar of the Asatru Folk Assembly so that we can see if we can help. If you're ever encountering any of that, I've had only one situation, and I didn't have to go out and do anything. With a member speaking of being tormented by a night terror Hagaziza, and I helped him with some things that could start to loosen that effect. But
so a couple of thoughts on it. And this is always a very interesting topic because it's a topic we don't have a lot of lore on. So this topic is something that has been a trail blazed very often in modern times and in different ways by different experiences of different people. So the guy I've had the most fun doing an interview with that was the most fair was an Anglican priest named Father Jack Ashcraft, and he is technically an exorcist for the Anglican Church, and he's been involved in some things. And so I think that different religions put a lot of different stuff in different contexts, but there's stuff out there that's, there's bad hanks out there that you need to cast out. And that's a thing. One thing that seems very much negative spiritual forces, and this cuts both ways too. When you engage in ritual and you do ritual work, you open yourself to the spiritual realm. And usually you're doing that in a positive way and bringing that in a positive context, and that's fantastic. When you use substances, and again, the Asatru Folk Assembly does not condone or encourage the use of illegal substances if they're illegal to use where you are at. But it do. Our ancestors, used different things to bring them closer to a spiritual place, be them, psychedelics or other things. And they have a tendency to open different pathways that allow spiritual forces to more easily reveal themselves to you or interact with you. You open yourself up that way. And you open yourself up to amazing, beautiful, fantastic things. But sometimes, if you're not prepared and you're not doing it in a cognizant, aware way, if you're doing it in a stupid way or in a negligent way, or if you're in a bad place and you ought not be doing it because you are not prepared, you open up the opportunity for bad things to happen too. And I think this happens to a little bit smaller degree, but we've seen it with alcohol and other things. Our ancestors absolutely encouraged the use of alcohol. They encouraged the heavy use of alcohol sometimes for spiritual purposes. There was a lot of drinking in our ancestors' culture to put you in a more spiritually perceptive place, to get you buzzed and feeling more spiritual. And it lowers your rational defenses, and it allows spiritual things to occur. But you've seen the difference between people who are happy drunks and who are angry drunks, or people who are drinking to celebrate and people who get real nasty and maybe have a problem or an addiction. I have first read about, observed, learned, but I've also seen real bad things happen to people who are in a state of addiction, to where they are vulnerable to negative spiritual forces. That's a big pathway for those forces to enter in and to do bad things to you and your family. Now, some of that is you just being a jerk and you being irresponsible and doing bad stuff. But another factor sometimes is negative spiritual forces having influence over you or interacting and entering into your life. So controlling that to where you're not engaging in those things out of addiction is really important. And you can tell a lot of those things. Like I said, you've all seen the person that just gets real happy and real quiet and or sleepy or whatever, or the person that gets in a rage and something's really wrong with them. Those are kind of indications on when some of that stuff can happen. Just as you're in a more, spiritually receptive place when you are a little buzzed, you're also in a more receptive place for malevolent things if you're not in the right headspace when you allow that to happen. And the other thing I was gonna, we just need to be mindful of, if there's positive stuff, then certainly there's negative stuff too, and just be aware and modulate how you act accordingly. And don't treat spiritual things frivolously. If you do a ritual, do it with intention. Do it directed and purposeful with what you're doing. Don't ever do spiritual things in a silly way or a frivolous way, because sometimes they're more real than you think they are. And I think that we've seen that with kids that get involved in silly occult stuff because it's fun to be in your goth phase or whatever, and bad things happen. But I think we kind of beat it to death, but it's a really important thing. It's a topic that's fascinating. And our last question tonight, and it's all right. So we often see our folk looking to foreign cultures and religions for a sense of belonging. It's always the white guy who wants to join the Indian tribe. It's become a stereotype, and even other groups of people don't respect us for it. Do you think this is part of the soul sickness of our folk? And how can we help our folks stop being ashamed of their heritage and embrace their native folk way? Um, First part is easy, and I don't even know if it's a real question. Yes, absolutely, it's part of the soul sickness. It is one of the biggest manifestations of the soul sickness. Absolutely, yes, unequivocally. The second part of how to fix it. This. So, first, we are taught that we don't have a culture, that like white people culture doesn't exist. And that's objectively extremely silly. But if you hear it enough and you're a child and you're susceptible to it, or you're just particularly ignorant, then I guess you can buy into that or whatever that thought is. And then we also get, so we need to be proud and further the awareness of white culture generally. But secondly, get them to be proud of it by being worthy of it and by building this that we do. It's hard to do that when stuff is disordered and silly and backyard fighting over a big piece of chicken stuff. The more we establish Hoffs and have dignified priesthood with our Gothar and have structure and order and build this to be the institution that is worthy of the Aesir, that's how people see that as a beacon of something they can actually be part of. Earlier in the chat here, or I think it was in a different chat, but I hear about that all the time. People hesitate because they go to things that exist that already have thousands of years of tradition and cool stuff and cathedrals and stuff built into it. Those things didn't just appear. They started at one point and got there. In a lot of ways, it's cooler to be at year 1000 because you have shinier toys, but everybody who is at year 1000 was once at year 1. Asatru was once at year 1 too. And for the longest time, it stayed at year 1 because every new year we had to start fresh because some new person's got some new, better way of doing it. And we have a lot of people amongst our circles that would have us continue to revert back to year 1 every 4 or 5 years when every backyard group implodes. We're about to finish year 30 in the Asatru Folk Assembly. That puts us 3 decades into a forward progression of our faith. If you're listening to this, I invite you, join us, build with us so that we can make this the institution that shines as a light to bring our folk home. We want to shine with the light of Balder so our folk can see the nobility of who we are, of our deeds, of what we do, and of our character, and that they feel proud to come home. We have more of that than ever. It's happening. It will happen faster if you're with us. So let's do that. Let's make that happen. And you guys being here as the audience is part of that. I don't know if that's it's a Wolf Throne question. You showing up here and asking these things as you do is a big part of that makes this happen. And we need as many of you as we can to do more and to be more and to build something worthy of our ancestors and worthy of our gods. And that's what we're trying to do all the time. Svan and myself are completely devoted to that. Many of our amazing folks in the AFA, certainly many of our Gothar, but also, many of our members and their families are all in on doing that. And the more of us who are engaged, the farther we can go and the faster we can get there. So there's a lot of work to do. Join the team, be part of what we're doing, be part of making it happen. With that, I want to bid you all good night. Svan looks like he's got something he wants to throw in. So Svan, what do you got?
Oh, there is one more question.
Question came in after I put a bookend on it.
Well,
no, that's 5 minutes. No, I'm just joking. I didn't see it. Go ahead with the final question.
Well, no, I mean, that's a just superb point that you said just about the last question and making things worthy for the gods, making this real. Is being in your backyard, is dressing in a tunic, in shoulder pelts, is that worthy of the gods? Do you really believe that, these people, when you look around and you see them? I had that very same question. For a lot of folks, I didn't, I joined the Asatru Folk Assembly in 2016. I've been Asatru since 1994. So yeah, that looking around and going, is this really what should be done? Is this worthy of the gods? Is this what makes them proud? So, you find a lot of detractors who try to come at it from two angles. One, they try to tear down the culture that we are building, the culture that is formulating over the existence of the Asatru Folk Assembly. And then the other is that, and that makes them really no better than the people that say, oh, white people have no culture. But the other is that you find detractors who, again, constantly want to try to tear it down to year one or year zero and start all over again with their new cool thing that they're going to do. And really what that is, the source of that is they have a defiance towards hierarchy, even though a lot of them will say that they perhaps are aware or follow ideology that promotes hierarchy. But then the moment they're in it, if they're not on top making the brand new cool thing, they don't want to do anything with it. And so you'll find these people rejecting and trying to, find whatever they can find, these little problems, these little things. They'll create their schisms. They'll create their kind of butler in the shadows behind the curtain with the dagger. They're just waiting to do that. And a lot of times they're doing that because they don't have the bravery to talk to their own community. They don't have the bravery to approach the leaders of the community. I know that even for myself, like a lot of the issues that I have seen since I've been in the Asatru Folk Assembly, people would raise a harangue about something. And I was like, you've never approached me about it. And, I'm in contact with the Asatru often. We have a friendship outside of this. We talk about things. You never approached me about this. Why? If it was so vitally important, why didn't you come to me? And I would drive this up the hill and wave the flag if there was a true issue. But no, it was the stalking butler. That's what they were waiting for. You see this a lot too with our detractors outside of Asatru, where they perceive Asatru in ways where it should be universal, etc. And they think that, I've seen comments just recently, all of these people are going to Nastrond, and all of these people are not going to be allowed in Valhall, and etc., etc. And I always ask, like, what makes you think that you have the right of it? Our ancestors have always warred with each other over ideologies. But at what point do you have the confirmation to say that you know absolutely the God's decree of doom upon you or your ancestors, outside of what we've been told, kinslaying, breaking oaths, and etc.? There's no answer. It's fallen silent. So there's so much to be proud of in the culture of Asatru but that needs to be learned, and that needs to be gathered. If you're trying to bring people home, the biggest thing is, emphasizing that they're here at this moment where we are dawning a new return of our folk culture. And the other thing is that it's built on positivity. It's not built on negativity. We're not out here pointing fingers and throwing rocks. No, we're completely turning inward, and we're building. And that's, I think, scares people more than anything. They need the trope of knuckle dragging, gangster, kind of, again, cartoonish villains. But in reality, no, we're focusing on building positive. We're focusing on our structure, our hierarchy, and ultimately making the gods proud of us. And that, I think, scares them more than anything. So find your source from there when you want to bring people back, is show them this, explain it to them, and get them involved. And I would say anyone who's folk that get them involved, and get them to reach out to folk builders and join us, because, as Asatru said, this is the not year zero. We're 30 years in, and we are building, and we are not stopping. And the gods have blessed us greatly. You can rally behind that. You have that strength. You have the strength of all of us. That kin fence is built. You're not alone, and you share that with everyone in the Asatru Folk Assembly. So, yeah, that was my rant.
All right. So the last question is interesting. So, where's the story of All Wise naming the drink for the different personalities of the worlds?
It's verse number 25, 26 in the Alvismal. Somewhere in there. It's towards the end. Alvismal is what we're actually covering next. So that's funny that he's asking that question.
I'm trying to find it super quick here.
Yeah, so All Wise.
All right, yeah, 34.
Is it 34?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I knew it was at the latter end. And the big thing to understand, I don't want to go too much into it because it's part of next, episode, but it is, again, one of those poetic lore drops where the poet, oh yeah, man, Nick was on it. No, wait, Nick, did you have it up? Yeah. So Lord Thor asks him about many things, and he answers. And this is Alvis's answer towards. I can't even remember the question. It's
Answer me, Alvis. Thou knowest all, dwarf, of the doom of men. What call they the ale that is quaffed of men in each and every world?
right.
Ale, Alvis spake, ale among men, beer the gods among, in the world of the wains, the foaming bitter drought with giants. The foaming bitter drought with giants, mead with dwellers in hell, the feast drought with Sutton's sons.
Yeah, I think this is super interesting about the beer amongst the gods. Is it bright drought or bitter drought?
Bitter drought, or bright. I'm sorry, bright drought.
Okay, I didn't know because what Nick had popped up was different. So I was like, oh, is there a translation?
I copied straight from Bellows.
Bright drought. Yep.
Well, and again, because we've already encountered numerous spelling issues. That's why I was like, oh, another one.
No, you're good.
The
one thing that makes me laugh is you both pronounced it drought. That word is draught.
Draught or draft.
Yeah.
It like
we'd be Americans. We'd be dumb.
I'm sure somewhere along the way back in the day, it was pronounced, draught. There's a lot of words in English that we use now that actual people from England are like, oh, that doesn't sound right. But then it turns out that's how it was said. like soccer is a perfect example of that. Soccer was the way.
Soccer is an English word. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I whenever I say draft, it has a different connotation. And so I just prefer to say the word draught. Yeah, again, this was for the poet to transfer down really cool ways for other poets to say things, to give them kennings. And the fact that he did it in a format like this. And, that the big reveal at the end is awesome. It really does show the true wisdom that Lord Thor has. And we do talk about that a lot as, our gods are real and they're not caricatures in the stories. So they're not just limited based on perhaps the trope they play in the story. And I love it when it kind of gleans towards that, that the lore does not define the gods, but this one really shows it is how cool Thor is in the way that he handles things. And Alvis is, or fun fact, Alvis is the same name as Elvis. Elvis is a Nordic and Northern Germanic name, meaning all wise.
There you have it. On that, we'll end on that note this evening. So, join us next week as we will be talking about a new Asatru hero that we're celebrating with the Day of Remembrance. We'll have a special episode on that next week. As Svan mentioned, 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about the Alvis Mal. If you can, make it to Montana for Freyr's Harvest Feast. It's going to be fantastic. We want to see you guys there. It's going to be awesome. We're looking forward to it. And until next week, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA. Remember, victory never sleeps.
Everyone.